I didn't say a word when they handed me that eviction notice. I just slid the 1923 water rights deed across the table and watched 35 McMansions turn into lakefront property. The Willowbrook Estates HOA thought they could steal my grandfather's farm while I was deployed in Afghanistan. These pompous bureaucrats built their perfect suburban paradise on stolen land, complete with tennis outfit Karens patrolling in golf carts. What they didn't know? I'm an Army Corps engineer. That little earth dam on my property had been waiting 45 years for someone stupid enough to build downstream. The audacity was truly something to behold, until the spillway gates opened and their luxury development got its first taste of natural flooding. Oh, this was going to be satisfying. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because you're about to witness the most beautiful HOA takedown involving federal water law and gravity. Let me introduce you to Jake Morrison. That's me. 34 years old, Army Corps of Engineers, and the third-generation owner of 47 acres of prime Texas land just outside Austin. My grandfather, who we all called Pops, bought this property back in 1955 when Austin was still a sleepy college town and barbecue joints outnumbered tech companies by about 1,000 to 1. Pops was the kind of man who believed in taking care of the land and the people on it. In 1978, he built a small earth dam on our property. Nothing fancy, just good engineering designed to collect rainwater for the cattle and help out our downstream neighbors during dry spells. The Army Corps of Engineers even helped him with the design. Pops always said that someday the back 40 acres would be worth something special, but for now it was just beautiful rolling hills where we ran cattle and I learned to hunt. Then came my 2 tours in Afghanistan, where I specialized in water management and infrastructure. Turns out, building wells and managing water flow in a war zone teaches you a thing or two about how precious clean water really is, and how quickly people will fight over it. While I was on my second deployment, Pops passed away. The property went into a trust managed by my well-meaning but overwhelmed sister Sarah, who lives in California and knows about as much about Texas land law as I know about surfing. She hired a local property management company called Lone Star Land Services to handle the taxes and upkeep. The property taxes got paid automatically, but here's the thing, Sarah never actually looked at the tax assessment. Big mistake. Enter our villain, Margaret Maggie Thornwell, 52 years old, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, and the kind of woman who drives a white BMW X7 and treats tennis outfits like business attire. Maggie's got that particular brand of passive-aggressive sweetness that Southern women perfect around age 45. You know, the kind where they'll smile while they're stabbing you in the back and somehow make it sound like they're doing you a favor. Maggie's married to City Councilman Rick Thornwell, which should tell you everything you need to know about how she gets things done. She's got a reputation for neighborhood beautification initiatives, which is fancy talk for forcing out anyone who doesn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. The smell of her expensive perfume can't quite mask the stench of cigarette smoke and entitlement that follows her around like a cloud. I came home from deployment in August 2023, ready to finally spend some real time on Pop's land. Drove down that familiar gravel road, past the old oak tree where I'd carved my initials as a kid, expecting to see the same rolling pastures and that little earth dam sparkling in the Texas sun. Instead, I found construction crews, concrete trucks, and survey stakes scattered across my back 40 like some kind of suburban invasion. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt different somehow, angrier. I could taste the dust and my own rising fury as I marched up to the construction foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he said, not looking sorry at all. "We got permits and everything. This is Willowbrook Estates property now." I called the police. Officer Martinez showed up and explained, with obvious discomfort, that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was overseas. Apparently, when nobody's actively using land for a certain period, and if you can prove you've been improving it, you can sometimes claim ownership. It's an old law designed to prevent land from sitting empty forever, but it's become a favorite tool of developers and HOAs looking to expand their empire. That's when Maggie appeared, riding up in her little golf cart like some kind of suburban warlord. Her voice had that syrupy sweetness that immediately made me want to check my wallet. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. "We're just putting it to good use for the community." But here's what really got my blood boiling. I discovered that her construction crews had diverted the small creek that feeds Pop's dam. The water level was dropping every single day, and with it, 45 years of careful water management that had helped our neighbors through droughts, floods, and everything in between. As I stood there watching the water level drop, Maggie's parting shot echoed in my ears. "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." That's when I knew this wasn't just about land, it was war. I hired the first attorney I could find. Big mistake. This guy quoted me $85,000 just to challenge the zoning change. Turns out, while I was serving my country, Maggie's husband, Rick, had pushed through an emergency zoning modification. My family's land went from agricultural pre-validation to residential development zone faster than you can say conflict of interest. But here's where my Army Corps training came in handy. While that overpriced lawyer was shuffling papers and billing hours, I was digging through the county records like I was hunting for IEDs, and just like in Afghanistan, the devil was in the details. I found Pops' original 1978 dam construction permits, and they were beautiful. See, Pops didn't just build that dam himself. He worked directly with the Army Corps of Engineers for flood control and watershed management. That meant federal jurisdiction, and here's your first knowledge nugget. Any dam built with federal guidance creates federal jurisdiction that local HOAs can't override, period. The metallic taste of adrenaline hit my tongue as I realized what I'd found. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a federal case. But wait, it gets better. While I was photocopying permits at the courthouse, I stumbled across a 1923 water rights deed buried in the old records. My great-grandfather had purchased senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the city, older than the county's municipal water system, older than every single one of those McMansions sitting on my land. They weren't just stealing my property, they were stealing my water. Meanwhile, Maggie was busy playing the victim. She organized an emergency HOA meeting about the dangerous dam structure, complete with a local news crew she'd obviously tipped off in advance. I watched her on the evening news, standing in front of her perfectly manicured lawn, talking about children's safety and neighborhood security. "We're just concerned about our children's safety," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "That dam looks ready to burst, and we have families living right downstream." The funny thing about local news is they love a good story, but they're not always great with follow-up research. If they'd bothered to check, they would have found that my dam had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. But Maggie wasn't done. She posted on the Nextdoor app, that digital neighborhood watch where HOA presidents go to flex their petty authority. Her post warned about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals in the area. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't have to. In a community that small, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with cedar pollen hung heavy in the August air as I stood on my front porch each evening, watching their construction crews work double shifts. They were racing to finish those houses before I could get any kind of legal injunction. Every night, I counted new foundation pours. Every night, the water level in Pop's dam dropped another inch. That's when I called my old Army buddy, Tony Riggs, who now works for the EPA Enforcement Division. 20 minutes on the phone with Tony taught me more about environmental law than 3 hours with that expensive attorney. "Jake," Tony said, "if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. And if your dam has federal jurisdiction," he didn't need to finish the sentence. I started documenting everything. Trail cameras around the property perimeter, time-stamped photos of every water diversion, flow measurements at 3 different points along the creek. My sister Sarah called from California, begging me to just take the money and walk away. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about the crunch of gravel under construction boots that had no business being on my land. It was about the sound of Maggie's heels clicking across courthouse marble during zoning hearings that should never have happened. It was about the bitter taste of courthouse coffee during research sessions that revealed just how deep this corruption went. But most of all, it was about that dam. Pops built it to help the community during dry spells. For 45 years, it had been a source of life for our neighbors downstream. Maggie's crew was turning it into a decorative pond for McMansions. Here's the thing about water rights in Texas. They're older than oil rights, older than mineral rights, and a hell of a lot harder to steal. But you have to know how to fight for them. As I stood there watching another concrete truck rumble past my kitchen window, I realized something important. This wasn't going to be won in a courtroom with expensive lawyers and legal briefs. This was going to be won with engineering. Maggie decided to turn up the heat. She organized what she called a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members in matching polo shirts who parked at my property entrance like some kind of suburban checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, wrote down license plates, and filed reports with the sheriff about suspicious activity. The harassment campaign was textbook intimidation. Loud music complaints when I ran my radio during farm work, unsightly structures, citations for my perfectly functional farmhouse that had been standing since 1962, environmental hazards, reports about my septic system that had passed inspection just 6 months earlier. But the real kick in the teeth came when Rick used his city council position to order a wellness check on me through Veteran Services. Apparently, I was a troubled veteran who might be struggling with readjustment issues. The social worker who showed up was apologetic but thorough. She had to check boxes on her clipboard while Maggie watched from her golf cart like she was supervising a military inspection. That's when the coordinated bureaucratic assault began. Building inspector, fire marshal, health department, and animal control all showed up on the same day like some kind of regulatory SWAT team. Each one found minor violations requiring expensive corrections. The building inspector, who happened to be a drinking buddy of Rick's, declared that my front porch needed $8,000 in foundation work. I recognized the squeeze play immediately. It's the same tactic they use in war zones to pressure local officials, overwhelm them with bureaucracy until they give up and cooperate. But 2 can play that game. While they were drowning me in paperwork, I was making some phone calls of my own. Tony Riggs at the EPA was very interested to learn that Maggie's HOA had never filed the required wetlands assessment before redirecting Willow Creek. Turns out, any development that redirects natural waterways requires federal environmental clearance even on private property, and the fines for violations start at $50,000 per day. The smell of fresh concrete curing in the summer heat reminded me every morning that I was running out of time, but my research was paying off in ways Maggie never expected. I discovered that their entire development had been built in what the Army Corps classified as a 100-year floodplain. Insurance companies had initially refused coverage until the HOA provided a flood mitigation plan. Their solution? Permanently divert Willow Creek away from the new homes and let it flood my property instead. Here's your second knowledge nugget. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When developers lie about flood risks to get coverage, that's federal mail fraud. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't Maggie's first rodeo. Her previous HOA in Houston had paid a $2.3 million EPA fine for an identical creek diversion scheme. She'd left town just ahead of the federal prosecutors and set up shop here in Austin, looking for new victims. Meanwhile, Maggie was spreading rumors about my mental health and violent tendencies. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my military service and organized a petition demanding the city condemn my property as a public nuisance. "We have children playing in these neighborhoods," she told the local paper. "We can't have unstable individuals threatening our safety." But while she was busy playing the victim, I was building alliances. I connected with other HOA victims through online forums and discovered a pattern. Maggie's HOA had absorbed 6 smaller properties through similar tactics over the past 3 years. Each time, the story was the same. Pressure, harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and mysterious zoning changes that always seemed to benefit Rick's construction company. I partnered with my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, whose family garden had withered since the creek diversion. I met Miguel Santos, whose family farm had been rezoned out of existence by Rick Thornwell 2 years earlier. These weren't isolated incidents, they were part of a systematic land grab that had been going on for years. The vibration of heavy machinery through my farmhouse floorboards became a daily reminder of what I was fighting for. Every morning, I watched concrete trucks rumble past my kitchen window. Every evening, I documented the water theft that was slowly killing Pop's Dam. But I was also preparing. I installed water flow meters at the dam outlet and creek diversion points. I calculated the exact volume of water being stolen, 1,200 gallons per day, worth $47,000 annually in agricultural water rights. The gritty texture of sand between my fingers as I tested creek bed sediment told the story better than any lawyer could. This wasn't just theft. It was environmental destruction on a massive scale. And then I got the certified letter. The city was planning to seize my property through eminent domain for public safety. The hearing was scheduled in just 2 weeks. Maggie's quote in the paper made her strategy crystal clear. Sometimes you have to protect the community from itself. But as I stood at my bedroom window that night, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, I realized something important. Those weren't just rain clouds building up. They were opportunity. Maggie went nuclear. Rick fast-tracked an eminent domain hearing, scheduled for just 2 weeks out, and suddenly the HOA was offering me $180,000 for property assessed at $890,000. The message was clear: take the lowball offer or lose everything. The local newspaper ran a hit piece that made me sound like some kind of domestic terrorist. "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community Progress" was the headline, complete with a photo that somehow made my farmhouse look like a crack den and me look like I hadn't slept in weeks. But Maggie's masterstroke was the photo op. She staged it perfectly. 20 concerned mothers holding children near my property line, with a professional photographer capturing their worried faces, while my farmhouse loomed menacingly in the background. The Facebook post went viral with the hashtag #ProtectOurKids. "Our children deserve safe neighborhoods," she told the Channel 7 news crew, "not whatever issues he brought back from war." You know what? She was right about one thing. I did bring something back from war. I brought back the ability to recognize when someone's trying to steamroll you with propaganda and the engineering skills to do something about it. Tony Riggs called with information that changed everything. The EPA had already opened a federal investigation into Willow Creek diversions based on my initial complaint. But here's the kicker. Maggie's previous HOA in Houston faced that $2.3 million fine for the exact same scheme. Federal environmental crimes follow individuals even when they move to new jurisdictions. While Maggie was playing the victim on social media, I was discovering that her entire financial house of cards was built on fraud. The HOA's construction loans were tied to inflated property values, and the banks had required guaranteed water access for loan approval. If those water rights reverted back to me, their rightful owner, the entire development would become financially underwater. The taste of bitter irony wasn't lost on me. They'd stolen my water to make their land valuable, and now their own greed was going to drown them. Maggie's panic was starting to show. She offered me $400,000 cash, no questions asked, 48-hour deadline. When I refused, she flew to California to approach my sister Sarah with some sob story about her brother's mental health issues. That backfired spectacularly. Sarah might not know Texas land law, but she knows her brother. She called me laughing. Jake, some crazy woman in tennis clothes, just offered to help with my troubled veteran brother. I told her if she contacts our family again, I'm calling the FBI. But while Maggie was busy making enemies, I was making allies. I partnered with environmental lawyer Amanda Cross, who specialized in pro bono water rights cases. Together, we formed a coalition with downstream farmers who'd been affected by the creek diversion. Miguel Santos brought historical documentation showing his family had used creek water for farming since 1887. Mrs. Chen provided photographs of her grandfather's garden from the 1940s, fed by the same creek that was now feeding Maggie's decorative water features. The local Audubon Society was particularly interested to learn that the creek diversion had destroyed critical nesting habitat for several protected bird species. Turns out, killing protected wildlife while committing water theft tends to get federal attention real fast. During my nighttime reconnaissance, old habits from the Army, I discovered something beautiful. Pops's Dam wasn't just a simple earthwork structure. The original 1978 design included an emergency spillway system with hydraulic gates that hadn't been opened since 1982. The hollow echo of water flowing through those underground spillway channels during my midnight tests told me everything I needed to know. The mechanism was still functional, and it was designed for exactly this situation: controlled flooding to restore natural water flow patterns. I calculated the water volume needed to restore Willow Creek to its original path: 2.8 million gallons. The dam was currently holding 3.1 million gallons thanks to recent rainfall. The math was perfect, but the timing had to be precise. Using my drone for aerial reconnaissance, I mapped the exact locations of those new home foundations relative to the original creek bed. 5 houses were built directly in the historical flood channel. 3 more had basements below the seasonal high water mark. Here's the beautiful part. The construction crews had installed decorative creek beds using concrete and decorative stones. They looked pretty, but they weren't designed to handle actual water flow. Meanwhile, my spillway system was engineered by the Army Corps specifically for flood management. Then Maggie made her biggest mistake. Her crew began installing permanent concrete barriers to completely block the original creek bed. This would make my spillway system useless and permanently destroy the downstream ecosystem. But it also gave me the perfect justification for what I was about to do. The Weather Service was predicting heavy September rains, perfect seasonal cover for emergency dam maintenance. As I stood at those spillway controls at sunset, reading Pop's journal entry about helping neighbors during droughts, the decision crystallized. Time to open the gates. While digging through dusty courthouse records for the 3rd time that week, I found a misfiled document that changed everything. Buried behind a stack of 1979 tax assessments was the original Agricultural Flood Management Covenant from Pop's dam construction. The language was beautiful in its simplicity. Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission to manage flooding, it was a legal obligation that superseded any HOA agreements or city ordinances. But Amanda Cross's investigation uncovered something even more damaging. The HOA's insurance applications contained flat-out lies. They'd claimed no seasonal flooding risk and permanent creek diversion approved by all agencies to secure $47 million in coverage. Here's your 3rd knowledge nugget. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When you lie to insurance companies about environmental risks, that's federal mail fraud with mandatory prison time. The deeper we dug, the more the whole scheme unraveled. Rick Thornwell's construction company wasn't just the contractor for the HOA development, he was the primary investor. Every house built on my stolen land put money directly in his pocket. And here's the kicker. He'd never recused himself from a single city council vote that benefited his project. Tony Riggs shared EPA findings that made my blood boil. The creek diversion had killed the entire population of Guadalupe bass, a protected species that had thrived in Willow Creek for generations. Texas Parks and Wildlife had documented the fish kill, but somehow the report got lost in Rick's office before it could trigger federal prosecution. They weren't just stealing land and water, they were destroying an entire ecosystem. But the real smoking gun came from Amanda's banking contacts. The construction loans were secured by fraudulent environmental assessments that claimed the creek diversion was a temporary construction measure. Banks were told the water would be returned to its natural flow once construction was complete. If those water rights reverted to me, the entire development would violate federal lending regulations. The banks could demand immediate full repayment of $12 million in construction loans. That's when I found Pop's handwritten journals in the farmhouse attic. His 1980 entry broke my heart. Opened spillway today, helped the Santos farm and 3 others get through dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam was never about our family's profit. It was about community service, helping downstream neighbors survive droughts and managing floods to protect everyone in the watershed. Reading those journals, I realized what Maggie had really stolen. It wasn't just land or water. It was 45 years of community cooperation that my grandfather had built, one neighbor at a time. My engineering analysis confirmed what I'd suspected. Maggie's creek diversion was creating an upstream flooding hazard. During heavy rains, the redirected water would back up into residential areas. The original creek bed had provided natural flood control for the entire watershed, and my spillway system was the only way to safely manage seasonal flooding. The timeline pressure was crushing. September rains were predicted to be the heaviest in 7 years. If I waited for the legal system to grind through appeals and federal investigations, natural flooding would happen anyway, potentially causing real property damage. But if I acted now, I could control the timing and intensity. A controlled spillway release would demonstrate natural flood patterns without endangering anyone, while proving that the HOA development violated federal environmental law. Standing at those spillway controls at sunset, holding Pops's journal, the moral clarity hit me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring the natural order that had sustained this community for generations. Maggie had systematically destroyed the local farming community. Miguel Santos lost his family's century-old farm. Mrs. Chen's ancestral garden withered without creek water. 3 other families were forced to sell generational properties to Rick's eminent domain schemes. But the federal environmental investigators were scheduled to visit next month. Perfect timing. If I could demonstrate natural flood patterns before their inspection, it would prove the HOA development violated multiple federal laws. The musty smell of old hydraulic fluid and the dam control mechanisms reminded me that this equipment was built to last. Pops had designed it for exactly this moment, when someone would need to stand up for the creek and the community that depended on it. As storm clouds gathered on the horizon, I made the decision that would change everything. Time to honor Pop's legacy and open those gates. You don't just open a dam without a plan. This wasn't revenge. It was a military operation with legal cover, environmental justification, and community support. First, I assembled my team. Amanda Cross coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional federal complaints to ensure maximum media attention when the spillway opened. Tony Riggs provided federal cover, guaranteeing that EPA investigators would witness what he called our natural flooding demonstration. Miguel Santos documented 40 years of downstream agricultural damage, providing historical testimony about seasonal flooding patterns that proved the creek diversion was destroying generational farming operations. Mrs. Chen offered her property as a staging area and brought credibility as the community's most respected longtime resident. Amanda's legal strategy was brilliant. She filed an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion, arguing that the dam covenant legally required me to maintain seasonal flooding for downstream agriculture. We weren't breaking the law, we were following it. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Agricultural water rights often supersede residential development rights, especially when you have historical documentation proving prior use. The key is having ironclad paperwork that predates any development claims. My technical preparation was pure Army Corps engineering. I created detailed spillway operation plans with precise calculations, controlled release starting at 6 a.m., gradual increase over 4 hours, peak flow at 10 a.m. The water volume was calculated to demonstrate natural flooding patterns without causing structural damage to anything except Maggie's illegal concrete barriers. Safety was paramount. I posted warning signs 24 hours in advance and personally notified the volunteer fire department. This wasn't some reckless flood. It was a carefully controlled demonstration of how water naturally wanted to flow. Amanda contacted environmental reporters from the Austin American-Statesman and local TV stations. Miguel arranged for community members to witness the agricultural water restoration. The strategy was simple. Control the narrative before Maggie could spin it as dangerous veteran terrorizes neighborhood. Our intelligence network was straight out of a spy novel. Mrs. Chen monitored HOA activity through the neighborhood gossip network. Never underestimate little old ladies with time on their hands. The local diner waitress, who happened to be Miguel's cousin, reported on city council closed-door meetings. My Army buddy at Fort Hood provided surveillance drone support for legal documentation. While I was rebuilding spillway controls with modern hydraulic systems, Amanda was waging financial warfare. She contacted insurance companies with evidence of fraudulent applications, arranged for banking regulators to review construction loan documentation, and prepared whistleblower complaints about Rick's conflicts of interest. The beauty was in the timing coordination. Weather Service confirmed heavy rains in 72 hours. Amanda scheduled federal environmental inspection for the same week. Miguel arranged for the agricultural extension agent to document downstream benefits. A perfect storm of natural weather, federal oversight, and community support, all converging at exactly the right moment. But I knew Maggie's psychology. She always escalated when pressured, so I prepared for her predictable responses. Emergency HOA meeting, media smear campaign, probably a restraining order filed through her corrupt judge friend. Amanda drafted preemptive legal responses to each expected attack. The evidence preservation was crucial. I compiled comprehensive photo documentation of the current creek diversion, recorded video testimony from affected farmers and neighbors, and gathered historical photographs showing original creek bed and seasonal flooding patterns. Amanda secured everything in federal court filings for legal protection. Safety protocols included coordination with the volunteer fire department, communication with downstream residents, and detailed notices posted in English and Spanish. I even created an evacuation plan we wouldn't need, just to demonstrate responsible management. The economic warfare was Amanda's specialty. She tipped off state banking regulators about construction loan irregularities, contacted the Texas Attorney General about insurance fraud evidence, and prepared a civil RICO lawsuit alleging a pattern of racketeering. Here's another knowledge nugget. Coordinated regulatory pressure often forces settlement faster than individual lawsuits. When multiple agencies investigate simultaneously, defendants can't fight on all fronts. The smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the evening air as I serviced all dam equipment and tested spillway gates under minimal flow. Everything worked perfectly. Pops had built this system to last. I stocked the farmhouse with supplies for a potential siege, knowing Maggie would try everything to stop me. Amanda filed protective court orders preventing interference with lawful dam operations. We established secure communications using military-grade encrypted radios. As I stood at those controls for the final equipment check, watching storm clouds build on the horizon, everything felt aligned. Weather forecast confirmed heavy rains in 48 hours. Federal investigators would arrive in 36 hours. Maggie was scheduled for her morning show appearance in 24 hours, probably planning another attack on my character. The timing was perfect. Dawn tomorrow would bring justice. And 45 years of stolen water back to where it belonged. Maggie's desperation reached new levels when she hired private security to patrol my property perimeter. These weren't just rent-a-cops with flashlights. These were the same tactical gear wannabes who work private military contracts and think HOA disputes are combat zones. My trail cameras caught them red-handed trying to sabotage the spillway control mechanisms at 2 a.m. One genius was caught on video attempting to jam concrete mix into the hydraulic lines while his buddy served as lookout. Tony Riggs had tipped off the sheriff's department, and Deputy Rodriguez was waiting in the shadows when they made their move. The arrest was beautiful. Mr. Tactical Vest claimed they were protecting community infrastructure from an unstable individual, but it's hard to explain why you're carrying a bag of quickset concrete at 2 in the morning. Maggie's media blitz was even more desperate. She appeared on the Austin Morning Show wearing her Sunday best and speaking in that trembling voice politicians use when they want to look like victims. Veterans need mental health support, not weapons, she told the host, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. This man learned to use water as a weapon in Afghanistan, and now he's threatening to wash away children's homes. Rick provided expert testimony as a city engineer about catastrophic dam failure risks, conveniently forgetting to mention that my dam had passed every safety inspection for 45 years. But while Maggie was playing victim on television, my surveillance training was paying dividends. I documented every sabotage attempt, every illegal entry, every piece of evidence that would later prove criminal conspiracy. Tony revealed that federal investigators had been wiretapping Rick's office phone as part of an ongoing corruption probe. These people were more desperate than I'd realized. The legal assault came next. Rick fast-tracked an emergency restraining order hearing for 6 a.m. the following morning, clearly hoping to catch us off guard. Judge Henry Walsh, Rick's golf buddy who'd received $15,000 in campaign contributions from Rick's construction company, agreed to hear the emergency public safety motion. Amanda discovered the corruption connection and immediately filed for Walsh's recusal, but we knew the fix was in. If they couldn't stop the spillway opening legally, they'd stop it through a corrupt judge. Meanwhile, Maggie organized a neighborhood safety patrol to physically surround my property. 20 HOA residents showed up with folding chairs, coolers, and Protect Our Kids signs, planning to live stream the spillway opening as environmental terrorism. The optics were perfect for her narrative. Suburban families with children versus dangerous veteran with a dam. But Miguel Santos had been busy too. He brought 30 farmers and families to support what we called agricultural water restoration. Mrs. Chen organized a counter-demonstration with historical photos showing the creek in its natural state. Amanda arranged for Audubon Society and Sierra Club representatives to attend. Two competing narratives were about to collide. Veteran attacks, families, versus community protects water rights. The technical sabotage escalated when security footage revealed someone had poured concrete mix into the spillway channel overnight, creating a blockage designed to cause actual flooding danger if I opened the gates. This wasn't just harassment. It was attempted murder disguised as vandalism. I worked through the night with a portable jackhammer, clearing the sabotage while documenting every chunk of concrete as evidence. The metallic taste of exhaustion mixed with fury as I realized how far they were willing to go. Rick used his city council emergency powers to declare my property an imminent public hazard, authorizing the fire department to secure the dangerous dam structure. Fire Chief Martinez, one of the few honest officials left in town, privately warned me that this was purely political. "Jake, you've got maybe 6 hours before they force me to intervene," he said. "Make it count." The insurance investigation breakthrough came at the perfect moment. Amanda's fraud reports triggered a state investigation, and the Texas Insurance Commission froze all HOA development insurance policies. Without valid insurance, the construction company faced immediate work stoppage. Financial pressure was finally hitting where it hurt, Maggie and Rick's wallets. Tony moved the EPA inspection up 24 hours due to credible sabotage reports. Federal agents were now en route, arriving at 8 a.m. If the spillway opened during their inspection, it would become federal evidence of proper water management. But Maggie's final gambit was the cruelest. She contacted Veterans Mental Health Services, claiming I'd made suicide threats and needed an involuntary psychiatric hold. The VA social worker arrived at my farmhouse at 5:30 a.m., just as I was preparing for the spillway operation. I had to convince her I was mentally competent while simultaneously preparing to flood a subdivision, not exactly a normal Tuesday morning conversation. Sarah called from California, her voice breaking. "I can't lose my brother too. Please, Jake, this isn't what Pops would want." For a moment, I almost cracked. Then I found Pops' final journal entry about standing up to bullies, and my resolve hardened like concrete. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek. At 7:02 a.m., with federal agents watching and the morning sun painting the sky orange, I opened the spillway gates to 25% capacity. The sound was magnificent, not the violent rush of destruction, but the gentle whisper of water returning home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek began flowing in its original bed, exactly where nature intended. Miguel Santos knelt beside the restored creek and cupped the clear water in his weathered hands, tears streaming down his face. "This is the water that fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years, he whispered. Maggie's reaction was immediate and predictable. She screamed at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her carefully composed morning show demeanor cracking like cheap paint. EPA agent Sarah Kim calmly explained, "Ma'am, this gentleman has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." But Maggie was live streaming on Facebook, her voice rising to near hysteria. "He's flooding our children's homes. This is what happens when we let unstable veterans have weapons." Except the water wasn't flooding anything. It was flowing exactly where it belonged, in the original creek bed that her development had illegally blocked. Local news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the spillway operation live. The Austin American-Statesman reporter was interviewing downstream farmers about their restored water access when Maggie tried to hijack the interview. "This veteran is using military training to attack civilians," she shrieked. The reporter, clearly confused, asked, "Ma'am, the water is flowing in the original creek bed. How exactly is this an attack?" You could almost hear Maggie's narrative collapsing in real time. Rick was frantically calling Judge Walsh, screaming into his phone about property values and campaign contributions. "That psycho is destroying millions in property value," he yelled, apparently forgetting that Amanda was recording the conversation from the courthouse steps. Here's a legal nugget for you. Texas is a one-party consent state, which means you only need one person's permission to record a phone conversation, and that person can be yourself. The engineering validation was beautiful. EPA agent Kim measured the water flow and confirmed it matched historical seasonal patterns exactly. Tony Riggs documented everything. This is how the creek flowed naturally before the 2022 diversion. Federal agencies prioritized natural water flow over development convenience, and we were proving that principle in real time. Mrs. Chen's garden irrigation system filled for the first time in 18 months. 3 downstream